This is the unusual chaos depositors have been enduring at cash points around the country. They describe the naira swap of the federal government as a policy somersault.
This policy was supposed to be a nice policy, but it is the implementation of it that has caused this chaos. We expected the CBN, prior to this time, they should have made availability of the 100 naira note and the 50 naira note in mass, so as to cover up for this.
We are begging the federal government to do something. Look at how people don't have access to their money. People are fraud. Many of them are just looking for transport money, not because they don't have money. They have more money in their ATM, but they don't have access. It's so frustrating. Please.
Most of the banks, they are not helping matters. They select their own customer to pay. If you don't have their own bank card, they can't pay you, and it's not supposed to be. So I pray that the government should look into it.
Sleeping over at ATM galleries, taking off time at work just to get some cash withdrawals, spell untold hardship for citizens.
I've been here personally since 8 a.m., 4 a.m. this morning, and it's never a funny experience at all. All day, this is where we are. I couldn't even resume work today. I have to take permission to make sure I access money for my family.
We have been here since 6 a.m. We are giving number and we have been waiting. The number is going gradually, but some more time they will not pay for the machine we have for.
Make them come settle. See officer they lie, see more post, see policeman, see soldier they join queue. What happen?
These days, when depositors come to the cash machine with their debit cards, they cannot get much done and they go back home frustrated. Well, perhaps the Supreme Court's judgment came like a respite, but Nigerians are asking the federal government to take an urgent step to stop and make better what they consider this policy somersault. What will happen in the coming days if the federal government doesn't do something, and very urgently too? Will the economy get shut down completely? Many questions begging for answers. Tolu Ojawumi, Arise News.
Well, not so many questions there begging for answers, really. I mean, if from the outcome of the elders of the country, you call them, the National Council of State, have said, good policy, print more naira notes. Okay. And the former economic advisor to the late President Umaru Musa Yar'Adua is here in the studio to help unbundle some of these issues. Very warm welcome, Tanimu, to Newsnight. Now, how do you, the elders of the country, former heads of state, chief judges, and other notable Nigerians have applauded the CBN's policy, but they say print more naira. Fair enough?
Yes, I think that's a very reasonable position on their part. In fact, it's something that ought to have been done much earlier, so that broad consultation would seem to have been undertaken before this policy was implemented. Now,
okay, go ahead. But sorry, go ahead.
We have seen that the function of money is being systematically impaired. It appears not to be serving as a medium of exchange. It is becoming a commodity of trade itself. And I think this is where the economy is being harmed. I'm telling you, down the line, the economy is going to shrink this year. And I don't think this was something that the governor of the Central Bank of Nigeria had anticipated.
But you know, reports reaching us, some survey done in the markets is that perishable commodities, the prices are coming down, either as a result of the scarcity of the naira, but kudos, even the market woman, the Meshai and the rest, they now have bank account that you can transfer to.
No, let me tell you what is happening. Okay. The poor are being decapitalized. People would rather trade with the currency itself. You give me 100 old naira, I give you 80 new naira. That gives an instant 20% return. People taking commodities to the market, including perishables, looking for money, are forced to discount, it's not inflation that is coming down. It's decapitalization of the poor. Whatever is given to them, they take it and return home. I'm not sure it was the intention of the policy to decapitalize the poor, but that is what is increasingly happening.
Okay, we've talked about the impact on the economy and then decapitalizing the poor, but would you say it's been all doom and gloom so far about this policy? Because we've heard from several economic analysts and even the authorities that this has been successful to a certain extent.
Well, you wouldn't expect people who have promoted this policy to turn out to be the same ones who are also criticizing it. Now let us look at the objectives of the policy, which certainly no one would quarrel with. It's a very difficult thing to get monetary policies to work in Nigeria. People say economic laws don't work in Nigeria. They do. But the main condition is not allowed to be fulfilled. And that is to have the bulk of the money in circulation. All the tinkering that you do to the statutory ratios is limited to the 20 or 30% of the money in circulation that is within the banking system. You have 70 to 80% of the money existing outside the system. Right. So this is why monetary policies don't work. And if this was one of the main objectives of the exercise, certainly no one would disagree with it. But looking at the timing of the decision or the implementation of the policy itself.
Sorry, just to be clear, and I hate to interrupt you. So when it comes to mopping up the cash outside of the control of the CBN, you would agree that the policy so far has been successful because we hear over 2 trillion naira, has been mopped up. Would you say it's been successful?
But people have to surrender. People have to surrender the currencies, the old currencies that are being demonetized. But at what expense? Trade is being stopped. Exchange of goods and services is being seriously impaired. I don't think that this represents a success story.
Go ahead.
Now, Tanimu, if you tell us, as a former economic advisor to late President Yaradua, what, new novelty would the policy makers be bringing to ease this, decapitalization of the people?
I think the elders have spoken. The popular opinion around the marketplaces, motor parks, on the highways and everywhere is that the old and new currencies should coexist so that money exists in sufficient quantity to facilitate the exchange of goods and services.
But Nigerians are already getting used to, having the new notes and the cashless society.
I don't think that it represents a normal situation for people to get used to suffering. It's an abnormality.
Okay, we know that the National Council is an advisory body, and the president has the final decision whether to go with this advice or not. And you are saying it's unpopular not to have the both old and new notes coexist. But I want to ask you, do you think there's a correlation between the politics, the economy, and the outcome of this policy? We see states of mostly the governing All Progressives Congress going to the courts, the Supreme Court decision, and you wonder where is the space for the economy itself, the economic policy to thrive?
Well, an election is a war. Weapons are used to fight wars. One election dethrones a particular political and social order. I can understand why those who think that they are being disarmed by the policy take to the extremes, saying all sorts of things and going to the Supreme Court of Nigeria for an interpretation.
All right, the interpretation, for some people, they see the rush, to the court by the government as being rash, that there were more socio-economic problems that engulfed the country.
You see, the main
for example,
function of the central bank of any country, under any setting, whether democratic or otherwise, is the stabilization of prices. Now, if you look at inflation, it hasn't abated, not only in the last 8 years, but going further back in time. And I think we are not addressing the fundamental issues that make the conduct of fiscal and monetary policies in Nigeria a very Herculean task, is that those functionaries who are supposed to bring succor, who are supposed to stabilize prices, are actually destabilizing the economy. And let me give you specific examples. Since we had refineries working, our 4 refineries working, a decision was made that was neither legal nor constitutional to allow 445,000 barrels per day for domestic processing. The refineries went under. We continued to allow importation. We continued to demonetize that. By the Constitution of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, that belongs to the Federation account, not NNPC. You have, and that cost $12 billion per annum. Fuel subsidy cost another $12 billion per annum. Central Bank of Nigeria takes petrodollars and official loans that gets to the bank in transit and on trust. It gets discounted at 40% below market price. This alone, if you reckon what has occurred in the last 8 years, between 70 and 80 billion dollars that should have gone into the Federation account has been distributed to the private sector. It's money that belonged to the public sector, and I'm telling you, this is what has created the fiscal gap that the massive borrowing that people are criticizing, brought about.
Why are the governors not looking at that direction?
I wonder, perhaps some of them benefited from the official foreign exchange allocation.
So this has become something of personal aggrandizement then? Well, not one that is populist for the people.
It's bad, it has to stop. And we hope whoever succeeds President Muhammadu Buhari would have the courage to tackle the problem at its root.
Okay. So you were talking earlier about the intentions of this policy, what's supposed to achieve. You've talked about inflation. You say it's not curbing inflation. There's also the issue of the security of the notes and counterfeiting. There's the issue of kidnapping, helping to curb ransom payment for kidnappers, and so many other things. And I wonder, one, how long would be enough for such a policy to work? Because President Muhammadu Buhari, this time last Friday, had said, even if 1 year is added, with saboteurs and those, in the way of this policy, it will still not work. So I'm asking you, how long do you think will be enough for this policy to work?
Let me say this to you.
Okay.
Let's say I have 100,000 naira and I have no access to banking facilities. I live in one of those remotest locations that is not served, that is underserved, where inclusion does not exist. I inherited this 100,000 naira from my father. Why should this money ever expire? What is normal, what should prevail is that whenever this money gets into the circulation, gets into the banking system, it's redeemed, it's a promissory note, it's an undertaking by the sovereign entity to redeem whenever this liability is presented. It must be honored, but then you don't let it into circulation again.
Well, there's a second leg to that question, but I also want to ask you, because all of this has also raised the question about the independence of an institution such as the Central Bank of Nigeria. One, do you agree that the institution is even independent? Two, does all of this, hullabaloo, not erode that that independence of the central bank? And why would another state not go to the Supreme Court to seek the reduction of interest rates?
Well,
if you say it's not curbing interest rates, another state could go to court.
I will come to that. I think we have raised 3 or 4 issues. The Central Bank of Nigeria became a politician, showed interest in replacing the president, and from that point on, lost all innocence. Anything that he does, even when he means the best, is interpreted politically. I think this is what has really undermined his personal reputation. Secondly, you talk about cost of interest. Yes. I would not be the one to tell you that any fiat administrative decision be taken to bring it down. People bring their money into the banking system for a real rate of return, adjusted for inflation. So if you want people to bring their inflation at the rate of 1%, make sure that at that rate, people are able to get a decent return, competitive enough for them to allow intermediation in the banking sector where deficit and surplus units come together, and the one without gets from the one who has, so that businesses can be financed and the economy can be productive to ensure full employment of resources, not just labor, even money itself, capital.
All right, you just pour some verbiages on the NNPC and its squandermania of Commonwealth monies that is supposed to be going into the Federation account, by your estimation over $80 billion. But some other critic will say probably your advice to late President Yar'Adua in reversing the sales privatization or the sales of the 4 refineries then gave room and root for these. What was your advice here on that?
Let me tell you, I belong to that government. If you looked at the outcomes of our economic policies, we brought inflation down, we reduced government borrowing. In fact, we stopped borrowing money. Interest rates fell. In the 2 years that we governed, we doubled foreign exchange reserves. We almost raised oil output by 100%. What happened with refineries? Bankers themselves, who lent money to private entrepreneurs who bought those refineries, months after the sale had occurred, the investors had not moved to take over the assets, to even do what was required to turn them around, and they were not servicing the debt. I tell you on my honor, I am a Muslim. I swear to the Holy Quran, bankers lobbied President Yar'Adua to reverse the sale so that they could get their money back. That is what happened, if you want to know the truth.
Well, we have to thank you so much for coming on the news tonight. We do appreciate the time. Tanimu Yakubu,
the former economic advisor to late President Yar'Adua.